7 matches, 0 losses. That's what Eala carried into center court in Toronto on the night of August 9th, 2026. A winning streak that started with a title and hadn't stopped since. And in 1 hour and 13 minutes, it was over. Not close. Not competitive by the end. A 12 seed from Switzerland won 8 straight games to close it out, and a stadium that had shown up almost entirely for the 21-year-old Filipina stood up anyway, for both of them. Here's the number that matters. 0. Eala won 0 games in the second set. 6-4, 6-love, in 1 hour and 13 minutes. Before this video ends, you're going to understand exactly what Belinda Bencic did to make that happen, and why this particular loss might end up mattering more to Eala's season than 3 easy wins ever could have. To understand why Toronto hurt, you have to understand what Eala had just built. She's from Quezon City in the Philippines, a country that has never produced a top-tier singles player on the WTA Tour before her, not in the modern era. Eala left home as a young teenager for the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, trading a normal childhood for clay courts and a language she didn't yet speak. That's the sacrifice nobody puts in the highlight reel. A kid from Manila, thousands of miles from her family, betting everything on a sport where most academy prospects never make it out the other side. She made it out, and by the summer of 2026, she wasn't just making it, she was breaking through. Eala won her first career WTA title at the Mubadala DC Open. She followed it almost immediately with 2 grueling matches in Toronto, a 3-set escape against Alicia Parks, and a bruising, ankle-testing win over Caddy McNally that went the distance. That stretched her winning streak to 7 matches, the longest of her career, and every single night she played inside Sobe Stadium, the building turned into something closer to a home crowd, 8,000 miles from home. Flags in every section, chants in Tagalog rolling down from the upper rows. A 21-year-old who had, in the space of 2 weeks, become the biggest story in Canadian tennis without playing a single Canadian. Here's what most casual fans don't know walking into that 4th round. Eala had never faced Belinda Bencic before, not once, at any level, at any tournament. Whatever was coming, she was walking into it completely blind. It's worth pausing on just how compressed that run had been. 5 straight wins to capture the Washington title, then 2 more 3-set battles in Toronto to reach the 4th round, all inside the same stretch of days. That is not a schedule built for freshness. That is a schedule built entirely on momentum, on the kind of adrenaline that carries a young player through match after match, until eventually something has to give. Nobody was talking about that math on the night of the match itself. Everybody was talking about the streak. Belinda Bencic is not a rising story. She's a finished one, still being written. 11 years earlier, at 18 years old, Bencic won this exact tournament, beating 4 top 6 opponents along the way, including a win over world number 1 Serena Williams that made headlines around the world. She's the reigning Olympic women's singles champion, a title she won in an empty stadium during the pandemic, with no crowd noise at all to carry her through it, just her own composure, built from the inside, with nothing helping her. She's a mother now, traveling the tour with her daughter and the rest of her family in tow, and heading into her match with Eala, she had already survived a 3-hour, 24-minute marathon against Taylor Townsend 2 nights earlier, a brutal, physical 3-set war that would have drained most 29-year-olds down to nothing. World number 14, 12th seed, former champion of this exact event, going back over a decade. That's who was sitting on the other side of the draw the whole time Eala was building her streak, waiting. There's a version of this story where age becomes the whole narrative, the 29-year-old veteran against the 21-year-old phenomenon, experience against fearlessness. That framing isn't wrong, but it's incomplete, because Bencic herself spent years on the wrong side of a very similar story. She had the ranking early, the excitement, the label of future star, and then she had a long stretch where injuries and form pulled her back down the rankings while newer names took the spotlight she once held. What she carries into matches like this one isn't just experience in the abstract, it's the specific memory of being the one everyone expected to win and losing anyway, which is a very different kind of lesson than simply being told you're good. Now here's the tactical piece, and it's the reason this video has the title it does. Alex Eala is a left-hander, and left-handed opponents are supposed to be a problem for right-handed players. The angles come at you differently. The spin bites the wrong way on your forehand. Most players never fully adjust inside a single match, and some never adjust across an entire career. Belinda Bencic does not have that problem, at least not on paper. Heading into this exact match, she had beaten 10 straight left-handed opponents dating back to 2024. 10 in a row, and even she seemed genuinely surprised by her own record when a reporter brought it up on court immediately after the win. In her own words, she called playing left-handers obviously very tricky and admitted flatly that she typically hates the matchup.
Read that again. The player who has now beaten 10 lefties in a row says the matchup makes her uncomfortable every single time. That is not a case of comfort producing results. That is a system that keeps working even when the person running it doesn't enjoy running it. And there's a specific reason that system was especially sharp on this particular night. 2 nights before facing Eala, Bencic had already spent 3.5 hours across the net from a different left-handed opponent, Taylor Townsend, in a long, physical, tactically messy 3-setter. That match gave her a live, high-pressure rehearsal of exactly the cross-court patterns and serve angles a left-handed baseliner tends to lean on. So when Eala walked out for the round of 16, Bencic had, in a very real sense, already done her homework, just against a different version of the same puzzle. Stay with me, because this is where the match actually turned, and it did not happen the way you might expect from a 6-love second set. Both players opened comfortably, holding serve without much drama. Then, Eala ran into early trouble on her own opening service game, committing 2 double faults that handed Bencic an opening. Bencic took the break and built a 4-2 lead, and then Eala, showing exactly why she had won 7 straight matches coming in, clawed all the way back, leveling the set at 4 games apiece. For a moment, it looked like exactly the kind of set Eala had been winning all week. Long, physical, decided by a handful of points either way. It wasn't. Bencic broke again in the 9th game and served out the first set 6-4. And then something shifted that had less to do with tactics and more to do with legs. Because from the moment the second set began, Alex Eala simply stopped looking like the player who had been packing out that stadium all week. So what do we actually know, and what are we still guessing at? Here's what we know for certain, straight from the official match statistics. The second set was a bagel, 6-love. Bencic won just over 76% of her own service points in that set alone, and 75% of her return points against Eala's serve. Across the full match, she finished with 61% of total points won, 57 points to Eala's 36. That is not a close match that swung late on 1 or 2 big points. That is a complete inversion of momentum from one set to the next. What we don't know for certain is how much of that collapse was tactical and how much was simply fuel running out. Eala had already survived 2 3-set wars just to reach this 4th round, on top of a first career title run the week before that. Stack it all together and you have a 21-year-old who had barely stopped competing for over 2 weeks straight. Bencic, despite her own marathon against Townsend, had the tour experience, the recovery habits, and quite possibly the fresher legs when it actually mattered most. Here's what most fans won't pick up from the box score alone. This probably wasn't one dramatic secret weapon unveiled for the first time under the Toronto lights. It was a proven veteran running the exact left-handed game plan that had already worked 10 times before, applied against an opponent who was visibly running on fumes by the second set. 2 explanations, both true at the same time. That is rarely how these stories get told on social media the next morning, but it is usually how they actually happen on the court. And here's the moment that matters more than the scoreline ever will. When the match ended, the crowd stood, not really for the winner, but for both of them. Bencic took the on-court microphone in a stadium that had spent the entire night chanting somebody else's name, and thanked the Filipino fans directly, acknowledging exactly who they had come to see, and thanking them for the atmosphere regardless. She said it was very nice for her to play in front of all of them, even knowing most of them were cheering for Alex. And Eala, visibly drained, tired, and a little sad by her own honest admission afterward, turned back to the crowd before she left the court and delivered a message in Tagalog, thanking the countrymen who had turned Sobe Stadium into a second home for her over the course of one unforgettable week. She later told reporters that Belinda had put her in some really tough situations and that she simply wasn't able to find her way out of a certain mode once the match started slipping. No excuses about the ankle, no complaints about the schedule everyone else was already talking about on her behalf, just gratitude and an immediate focus on recovery and the next tournament. That response, composed, gracious, already looking forward, is the part of this story that will never show up in a stats database 5 years from now. The scoreline says 6-love in the second set. It does not say how someone actually carries that walk off the court in front of a crowd that flew across an ocean to watch her do something else entirely. So where does this leave both of them? For Bencic, the reward is brutal on paper, a quarterfinal against world number 4 Coco Gauff, the very same player who eliminated her from Wimbledon just weeks earlier this year. A rematch, on a hard court this time, with genuine momentum finally sitting on Bencic's side of that particular rivalry for once. For Eala, the streak is over, but the season absolutely is not. She's already looking ahead to Cincinnati, and beyond that, a Grand Slam in New York, where a healthy, properly rested version of the player who just won 7 matches in a row could look completely different from the exhausted one who managed only 6 total games against Bencic in Toronto. The real question this match leaves open isn't whether Eala can compete with the very top of the tour. She has already proven that, repeatedly, over the last month alone. The real question is whether she can do it on a body that hasn't just played 3 tournaments back-to-back in barely 2.5 weeks. That answer arrives not in Toronto, it arrives next. There's also a longer lesson buried in this loss, one that has nothing to do with Cincinnati or the US Open specifically. Every young player who breaks through the way Eala just did eventually runs into a match like this one, a match where the opponent isn't intimidated by the crowd, isn't rattled by the streak, and has simply solved the puzzle in front of her before the first ball is even struck. How a player responds to that kind of night, not the next morning in a press conference, but months later in the way they train and schedule and pace themselves, tends to say more about a career than any 7 straight matches ever could. The story isn't over. Cincinnati is coming, and when it does, everything changes. Do you think fatigue decided this match more than tactics did, or did Belinda Bencic simply solve a puzzle she had already been working on for 2 years? Tell me exactly what you think below. If this breakdown helped you see the match differently, subscribe and hit the bell, because we're covering every single round Eala plays through Cincinnati and all the way to the US Open. And drop a comment letting me know which deep dive you want next, Bencic's quarterfinal showdown against Coco Gauff or Eala's road back to form in Cincinnati.